Welcome to Season 2, Episode 1 of OtherWorldly Encounters with Mike and Brian. Today, we have who?
We have our special guest on today, PsychoSpiritual person Dorie.
Love it. All right, Brian, for today's episode, what are we drinking, man? What's our weapons of choice?
So I was at the store earlier today and it just felt right. We had a preliminary conversation with Dorie earlier in the week and she said we're going galactic. So I found this beer from Homestead Beer Company called Galactic Heroes and it just felt right. So that's what we're drinking tonight.
Love it. Love it.
All right.
All right. Dorie, how are you doing?
Hello, how are you?
Good. Can you just give us like a brief introduction, basically like your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I'm from Persian American heritage and I was raised in Virginia. I have gone to college in Virginia and then I joined the Air Force, continued to go to college, and then that brought me to Ohio and all the places that I've traveled so far. And yeah, so currently I'm a psychology scholar and a doctoral candidate. So I had to do that part, the science part. And the spirituality part, I'm fascinated with esoteric and spirituality, esoteric sciences and spirituality. I'm going to repeat this. I'm fascinated with esoteric sciences and spirituality and energy medicine. So, in the past few years, I guess I have always been intuitive, but in the past few years, I've actually delved into exploring that, developing my own, and some of my gifts have gotten activated without even classes, like mediumship and animal communication and channeling and those things that really, really fascinate me. I think that's good. Do you have any questions?
Yeah. So Dorie, we had a conversation earlier in the week just to kind of chat about what you're into and who you are and different things. And I found it fascinating. So not only do you speak 5 languages, you have multiple degrees. So you're not just some Joe Schmo off the street. Like you're very well educated, well spoken, and super energetic. You were a lot of fun to talk to earlier. Can you kind of talk through some of that? Tell me how many languages you speak.
Okay. So, so yeah, Farsi and some Arabic. Yeah, I understand some Turkish, English, of course. Afghani, Dari a little bit. I understand that. We lived in Austria, so I understand some German. And then all the other channeling languages. I'm going to count light language as a channeling language
Yeah, I
too.
can't wait to talk to you about light language. But you went to school for psychology, right?
I
That's
did.
been your focus.
Yes. I've got a couple of, I had biology and I have political science and business and MBA. And currently I'm doing a doctor of psychology.
So it's so interesting to me. So like we spend a lot of time on this show talking about kind of like how do you bridge science and spirituality and kind of the aspects of belief. And for you, Dorie, it's really interesting to me and I'm curious to get your take. How do you kind of find yourself bridging the gap between science and spirituality?
I love this question. It's almost like, did the chicken come first or the
Right.
egg? Me? Of course, I come from a family of scientists and doctors and engineers, and the Persian culture is full of like, if you go in the past, algebra and astronomy and, but there are also a lot of mysticism and, like alchemy and all those things. So I think genetically in my heritage, there's a combination of both. So I think that is what kind of like leads me into personally being always inquisitive. I always want to know more. I want to know why. So I think to me, science tells us the how, but spirituality usually answers the why.
Mm.
Like, why are we here? What, you know, what's our purpose? Um, we know how we're here, right? We were born scientifically and the biology of it. So I feel that um, spirituality answered some of the questions that I could not
Mm.
really get deeper answers to when it came to scientific knowledge. And I feel that there's a lot of room in psychology and other places for newer, perspectives, for looking at things differently and not just really sticking to the old frameworks. There's nothing wrong with old, but it's just like, are we evolving scientifically? And I know that spiritually, information comes in super fast, and I've really taught myself to trust that. So for me, it's a combination of both always. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does.
No, it's great. So it's just kind of piggybacking off of Brian's question. Can you just share how like your Persian American heritage has like influenced you, like your spiritual and professional journey? Because we discussed, you have multiple degrees and stuff like that. So can you just kind of highlight that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm just going to piggyback on what I just said. Again, I think that there's something called third culture kids, right? If you come from different culture, sometimes you have to really learn how to be uncomfortable.
Mm.
I have to learn a new language, how to meet new people. So that really shocks your system. And, from a consciousness perspective, when your system's shocked, when you're uncomfortable, it actually raises your intelligence. It could actually assist with that. So I think that because of being able to travel and coming from that culture and having to go to the German culture in Austria and then in the United States, there's just so many different cultures. I've always been interested, but I think they really brought to me the interest in wanting to learn the many different ways. Again, that's the love of psychology for me, of understanding behavior and why do people do what they do, and cross-cultural understanding. And then as I channeled and understood that, oh my goodness, there's more than this planet, there's more than this dimension, there's more. Then I was just like, wow, in the galactic sense, how do we translate that? How do we understand that even more expanded?
It's really interesting, Dorie, and I totally agree with you. Growth typically comes from being uncomfortable because if you're in a constant state of comfort, there's a good chance that you're not growing. So I totally understand what you're saying. Let me ask you this question because we've kind of talked about the cultural influence, but you also mentioned you're from the Air Force. So does that have any kind of, I don't know, did that help kind of shape your views either from a discipline standpoint or maybe energy or metaphysical concepts? Does that play into who you are as a person at this point?
I would say absolutely. Listen, I'd like, first of all, I was very proud of joining the Air Force. So I come from an oppressed religious background, and the United States gave my family religious freedom. I don't want to get too sentimental here, but so for me, it was just like a lot more to give back, not to always take, not to always think, but it was a way for me to prove to myself, one, that I could do something that many in my family didn't, right? And two, it was as a woman in the Middle East. I was, a lot of my family are not allowed to go to university and do a lot of things, especially women. So for
Mm.
me, it just goes deeper than just being a service member. It was just that love of freedom and like giving back. So from how it helped my spirituality and my character and who I am today, I believe that structure and focus was very needed. Even if you're doing spiritual work, and sometimes people think if you're a psychic, it's just all flowy and it's in the ether. No, absolutely not. You have to be the type of person that understands boundaries and lines and structure, because then you'll just open yourself to, as we all see, right? People have possessions, they can't control it, spirits wake them up, there has to be a sort of assertiveness and structure of how you go about things, right? And focus is super key in any kind of healing work. So I think that Air Force gave me, and in a way, it's a protective environment, right? The society is wild, wild west. So in the Air Force, you can't do drugs. You guys have been in the military, so at least it keeps you also like, aligned. So
Yeah.
that's my.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You brought up a couple little things in there that I really want to talk about, but Brian will get mad if I get off track here. So I'm going to move forward. I'm going to keep going because this is where we get down rabbit holes and I get unfocused. So, but like, so that's all fascinating, and I really appreciate your service and thank you for that. And so, at what point in your life did you just have like this, like what triggered your spiritual awakening? Like, was there like a certain event, like,
Yeah, was it a slow roll, or like
Yeah.
how did you come to discover that was happening and you were conscientious and maybe like willing to engage in it?
Yeah, so it's a long journey as it is for a lot of people, right? I've always been intuitive, even I think as a kid, and I think most people it's the same. Usually, like, kind of feel energies. I didn't ever want to sleep with the lights off. Like I had to have the lights on because I could feel other beings. But now that I know it was like my grandparents or angels, and it was just like it was safe. But as a child, I didn't know that. So, um, I would say like some of those gifts are inherent in all humans, in all of humanity, and sometimes certain particular ones get passed down to you from different like your ancestors. My great grandfather was able to heal people who had plague with his hand. He was known. And I have another great grandfather who was a healer with herbs and stuff. Like he would heal people, they say, by prayer, but we all know what he did. He tapped into their energy and he was doing energy medicine. I just know that. So I think part of that comes to me. Then personally, eventually I realized, oh my gosh, I'm an empath. And I think so many people are empaths. When I realized that, I'm like, I'm picking up everyone else's energy. I think that was my first thing of like, I need to do something about this. I should not be sad right now. Why do I feel depressed? Why do I feel sad? There's nothing wrong in my life. And then you eventually realize, oh my goodness, I am picking up the energy from the collective, the energy from people, the energy from wars. So like that was one of my thing where I started, I was like, I need help. Like I've got to do something about this because there has to be something. So that got me into crystals and Reiki and taking more of like spiritual awakening classes. And then personally, of course, I was having more and more, maybe like about 6 years ago before the pandemic, I felt this like surge of energy and I feel like everything just got super activated. And I was just getting ideas about AI and I was getting, we got to do this. I just so much just got downloaded and I was getting these like migraine headaches. I still sometimes do, but now I know sometimes they're just downloads and upgrades of energy. So that to that. And then I continued. I am thirsty for more information. I'm always working. I'm always in classes and I'm always sharing to people. I want people to also see who they truly are. What I am is a mirror of them. We all have these gifts. We just have to work on it and see the truth within us. Hopefully this was a good answer for you.
So I mean, that's a heavy load to shoulder for you as a person. Like, and I remember from when we talked to Gregory, and I know you've spoken to Gregory before, and that's how we kind of connected to you and talking. When we talked to Gregory, it's kind of a heavy load because the question is as a psychic medium, how do you receive all of this information? And I remember vividly Gregory's description of like it's being in a crowded room with a lot of voices, and you're trying to pick out voices to listen to specifically. So I guess for you, like, if you want to call this your spiritual awakening, like it seems like it's
Yeah.
obviously had a pretty profound impact on probably your day-to-day life and your relationships then too. And I don't know if that's been a positive or negative or maybe a little bit of
Yeah.
both.
I can share a little bit more, Brian. That's so okay. I know I make it sound easy, right? Because it is scary and it's messed up. You can hear things like my drawer would open at 4 a.m., like you don't. I thankfully Gregory is like my family, right? Like he's my soul family. I've known him for 12 years and immediately like after I awakened, I actually called him. I'm like, do they open the doors in the middle of the night? He's like, yeah, they pulled the blankets off of me. I was like, okay, we need to do something about this. I gotta go to work. So there's a lot of like that discernment. Again, going back to assertiveness and delegation, you really use some of those aspects. where you speak out loud, you call on Archangel Michael and you say, hey, I don't want any energies here that are not supposed to be here. So it's just learning those things, which I hope that I could do for others like me who are experiencing these things, to realize, because our society doesn't talk about it, right? It's woo-woo. If it's not in the science or in some religious book, it doesn't exist. It's bad, it's pagan, it's woo-woo. But the reality is everybody's experiencing these things. We're awakening. People are awakening to their gifts and then feeling left out because they can't share it. Most of the time, our families are not. They also are gifted, but they don't support that. So I think that having that support for Gregory as my psychic, or just someone, a spiritual person you can talk to, is very important. Or just seek out help. I'm happy to help anyone. Sorry, my crystal just fell. um, it could be the spirits too. So they just
Right.
they're in
Right. So,
everybody's here.
so Dorie, I mean, I appreciate you and Gregory for sure, and Gregory was one of the I think, and you and Gregory itself, having you guys on the show, I think that we're very fortunate to have.
It's put us on a journey, hasn't it?
It really has, and we won't go into that right now because you don't want me to go down rabbit holes.
Well, but from two guys drinking beer in a garage talking about UFO sightings to now, we're pretty deep in here, and we're talking to somebody in Dorie who's really experienced it firsthand and is shoulder to load and is dealing with things that not a lot of people have to deal with. And it's interesting to know whether some people would want to deal with it or not. And Dorie, I'm kind of curious, is this something that you feel like you invited, or this was just pushed upon you and you've just accepted it?
I think to some extent, it's almost like it's part of your purpose, and the hope is that you start awakening to it. But I also saw it, right? Like it a little bit came to me. I've always I know Gregory for so long before I was like fully awakened. So I like psychics, I like tarot readings. Your soul usually likes these things. When you're like, I want to know more, that's your soul telling you, hey, go explore that, So the key is to understand, to hear from the ears of your spirit and from this other senses that you have, or maybe the higher aspects of your current senses. So for me, I wanted to know more, right? Like they don't just always drop it on you, but some people are born with it. And with Gregory, right, like his generation, there's not a lot of like guidance, right? You just kind of, thank God for me, there's all these videos and all these things and an abundance of healers and classes. But for Gregory, for people, certain people, they just don't know and they don't have the help. So I think it's sort of like both. Again, I know I don't want to constantly say both, but it came onto me, but I was already involved. So I was like, ooh, okay, light language, something is happening. What is the class? And just Google this. So I gotta thank the internet for my awakening.
So Dorie, during this like little journey that you've had, obviously from your youth, and then before you met Gregory, and then once you connected with Gregory, like when did you realize that you had like that extraterrestrial, either an extraterrestrial experience, or that you could potentially communicate with extraterrestrials? Like, what part of your journey did that come? Was that like later, or is that kind of like what maybe startled you a little bit when you were a youth because you realized that you might have had that ability then?
I just that's a very good question. I love talking anything alien and galactic. So yeah, I don't have much recollection of it, and I think it was by design that that stuff is sometimes hidden from us. But all of us, most people travel to all these different dimensions after they sleep, even from birth. So I I didn't necessarily maybe know at the time until I was awakened. Then I started speaking to different ET civilizations, kind of like, receiving that information. And I'm still exploring this, but just recently I did find out that my mother is also like a star seed, and I'll explain that in maybe another episode or whatever. And there was things there. and it's the first time I'm saying this on air. I have had connections with that, and I saw that my soul, has different appearances and existences concurrently with right now in all these other timelines and dimensions and even galactically. So for me, once I think I had a reading and they told me that I have, and this is the Arcturians, I have some Arcturian background. So I then started looking into, well, who are the Arcturians? What is this? What does this even mean? How many of these are there? Is this a lie? Is this true? What does that mean? So I then started researching. And as I was researching, more and more information was coming to my awareness, popped up on YouTube, weird stuff. So then, it just, and as I opened up more, right, like, so they have the law of non-interference right now. Um, we'll go into all that another maybe time, but so they don't interfere until you're absolutely ready. The I guess the benevolent ETs will
Yeah.
not with you. So
Dorie, do you feel like, and this is an interesting concept to kind of explore a little bit deeper, because you're talking a lot about spirituality. We've talked about healing and energies, and now we're kind of intertwining ETs. So I'm curious, kind of from your perspective, like, how do you interpret the overlap between extraterrestrial experiences and kind of maybe humanity's collective spiritual evolution? Are those things two and the same, or are they completely separate? Like, how do you see that from your perspective?
do you mean like experiences as in like people who are having experiences?
Well, I think that's the interesting part. So, like, we've been talking a lot on this episode just recently in the news, a lot of New Jersey drones taking place, right? And are these orbs, are these drones, or different things? So people are seeing things in the sky, but then you also have people like Betty and Barney Hill who have been abducted. But then you also have people like Christopher Bledsoe who believes it to be, Hathor, and that trying to talk to him from a spiritual perspective. So like how from your experience and what I'm struggling to even phrase this in the right way. How from your
I'm with
experiences and like what you've dealt with, do you feel like those things are intertwined, or are they?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I really think like sometimes that there's so much at play here. And I recommend your readers to go to Dr. Greer and others and always have discernment. Before I say anything about this, just see what resonates with your heart and kind of like leave the rest. But I think before I even say it, I would pray or ask the universe, God, or whatever, to say, hey, I'm open to know the truth. Please show me. And then be patient, allow time and then, but watch for things to show you. So that's what thing people can ask because people are at different journeys, at different, times of their journeys. And sometimes they're not meant to fully awaken, even if they have, or they're not meant to know. But sometimes people, before they incarnate, there's meetings and they agree in a contract to help out with different programs, different ET programs with genetics and helping different things. But because when we come to this particular density where we forget, um, people are just like freaked out. And so it is scary, it's horrific, and it's very scary because you don't know what you've signed up for, and people have trauma from this.
Yeah.
But
Go ahead, Dory. I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
So I have also obviously been doing a lot of research on density, and we're not going to get into like the rabbit hole of density, but you did bring it up. And can you just briefly, because I think most people get dimensions and density confused. Are you able to just provide like just like a really quick, what separates the two?
I mean, as much as possible. Okay, I did write that. Okay, sure, no problem. So like density and dimension, um, it's a little bit okay, buckle up a little. I kind of wrote it down because I thought maybe you'll ask, but densities are the different phases of consciousness, right? So if let's say, um, so
So like density one would like the first density would just be like basically like when the earth was established, when it was growth, right? And then density two, we move into where you start to have some like microorganisms and plant life. And then kind of towards the tail end of stage two, you can always correct me if I'm wrong here. That's where we get into like dogs and elephants and dolphins, right? They start to have like a little bit of consciousness and they can start making decisions, and they have a name, like a pet, right? And then you get into like uh, the third, like where we're currently at, right, where we have conscious decision making, and we get to pick between basically like the light, white, and the dark side, right? Like it's good or bad, and then you have density, 5 through 7, right? But like the dimension itself is just basically where you're currently at, but you can say like maybe your soul like kind of leaves your body and goes to like a somewhere else, right? Is that kind of like, is that a really easy way
that's
of?
what dimension is like. When you say, multidimensional, basically dimension is everything.
Hmm.
And like you can have it's really encompassing everything,
Okay.
but density is the density that you're in.
Hmm.
But sometimes dimension is you can go, when they say interdimensional, it's just like all these different layers of existence all the way to even a different universe, right? We have one universe, and then within that, all this happens. Every universe has like its purpose and it does things and it has to have light and dark and movement without getting too far into it. But dimensions could go through. But and again, from what I understand, so I know like they say humanity is multidimensional, right? So we could be in many different densities. So I can have, I don't know if people may be understanding the higher self or the super conscious. That self is also you, us, that has gone to different dimensions, but sometimes you can come back to further up.
Mm.
So like your higher self is in the sixth dimension, coming back to assist us in all these things. And us, I mean like all these different us, right? Like for me, it's like me, Jackson, Jason, Jillian, all of the beings that I
Mm.
am part of this bigger soul. So that's again, this is I can exist like that, but dimension is now also, it could be part of these different stages, but it could also be this whole, take all of this in. I feel like I want to get maybe more into it another time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, we'll have
Like,
it. I just wanted to just kind of give like, because you've mentioned
absolutely.
you mentioned a few times, and I just want to kind of give our viewers and listeners just kind of like a high level what that would mean. But we'll definitely have another episode about that in the future. And you've talked about you've obviously do hypnotherapy and regression work, right? So with like on the regression work side of it, like what's like the most fascinating discovery you've encountered through like a past life regression?
Mhm. So with hypnotherapy, it's very fascinating. It's been super key in my journey, and I have to call out Dolores Cannon. She's wonderful. She's a guide of mine, and I've taken her courses, and I'm certified in her courses. So I have had people channel extraterrestrials. And for example, someone brought in an aspect of them, right? A counterpart of them in a different dimension, like I was explaining to you, and their name was Astro, and they brought in this information, and this being was talking about love, and I was like, what is it like what are you talking about? Give me a real definition of love. And this being, like as I was doing this, all of a sudden said, this is how it feels, and it was like someone poured ice water on my heart. And I was just doing this for someone. I mean, it was incredible. Like I physically felt this thing that they did. Again, this if this stuff didn't happen to me personally, I probably wouldn't be such a believer. I'd probably be like some of the my other family members who are like, what do I want to know this for? But I love them though. Yeah, I love all of them. But it's just like again, and then people being healers, and one thing I really am getting into experiencers and hybrid beings. They're beings on our planet who have a lot of ET genetics, and they sometimes are they're not sharing who they are, or they're very afraid, or they've had traumatic experiences that they don't know their role. So I would like to be able to do more of that with this. I'm very fascinated with hybrid beings and starseeds and people who are really existing in all these different uh, star systems and universes and dimensions. So it's all
You're
fascinating.
so we covered a lot of ground there in a short period. And
You're welcome.
on the dimensional piece. So just so I understand it, because you use the term star seed, and I know we're not going to be able to kind of cover the entirety of what that is, but just knowing from the conversation that we had prior to this podcast, just kind of understanding who you are and what you're into. I guess for me, as you're talking about channeling extraterrestrials, and you're talking about star seeds, do you feel like, and I would be remiss if we didn't discuss what star seeds is, so I'll ask you to just kind of give an overview of what that is. But do you feel like the soul, because we oftentimes talk about humans as a container for a soul, do you feel like that soul is something based on this kind of 7D or 6D, whatever structure we're talking about? Is that something that can go into both a human as well as an ET, and we're all kind of part of one bigger picture? And is that what you're talking about when you're talking about star seeds?
Yeah, it goes into it, but you're asking two separate questions, and I will bring probably images that you all maybe can show. I made a chart that you can show, right? The idea so far up to now for a lot of humanity in this time and space has been that we die, the soul leaves, and then it incarnates to a different person and their past lives, right? Then we expanded more and they're like, oh, I can actually talk to future lives. Super cool. But now a lot of the information that is being channeled to us, and maybe that where humanity is more ready to receive this type of information, is that there is like source, God, and there's an oversoul, and this oversoul is like it's connected to all of these different beings, right? And these beings, like it could be right now, simultaneously, multidimensionally existing. So I'm existing, the ET me is existing, the me from 1920s is existing, the me in Sirius star system is existing, the me as a dude that's in like some fisherman out in Australia is existing,
Yeah.
and so think of a circle. The circle goes into, let's say, just direct line to 10 squares, and these squares can have energetic connections. Before it would be a circle coming down these to all these squares, but the squares will just have this kind of like dies, time and space. Dies is alive, dies is alive. But now we understand that everything is multidimensionally existing. So
So,
we can go.
so when you were talking about like past lives, do they all kind of run parallel with each other? Is that what you're saying?
But they're not, like, we're understanding now more that they're not necessarily past. They could just be at a time and space that humanity defines as the past. They're all existing. When time and space bends, that existence is happening. This is my understanding. Again, I'm still researching this. These are mind blowing concepts. And I'm going to put a book together from my research and some of the stuff I channeled. So maybe I'll bring that book out to
Hell yeah.
your.
Oh yeah,
We'd love to
Okay.
market it for you. Well, it's interesting. We know that time isn't linear, and it's something that we've talked about on this show multiple times. And it's like if you took a paper and scrunched it up into one and poked a hole through it, you could really skip forward in time. If you're thinking of the flatness of the paper being linear time, you can punch a hole through it. But I guess what you're talking about is even a more profound concept, which is being able to communicate with different dots on that timeline, be it linear or not. And I guess my question to you, Dorie, is that and you've used the term, you used it just a little bit ago, but when you're talking about light language, is that what we're talking about? The ability to kind of communicate universally? Like when you say light language, what is it you're talking about?
But I love that you did that. And I feel like, every time you bring this stuff up, this is why I love talking to people about it because you just make, you're making these connections as we speak, as we understand it. And sure, yes, Brian, that's very true because some of the way light language presents itself to people is different. Like if you listen to different people bring in light language, it sounds different. Sometimes it sounds like gibberish, sometimes it sounds like an ancient language. And they say that this is a language of the soul, right? Like it bypasses the conscious mind to bring in the frequencies. It's sort of, and it just sounds like some of the old or other languages that have existed. So I think that part of it goes into what you're saying, right? If there's a Brian that right now exists in Egypt and like, he's an Egyptian, you can connect to that. You can maybe your light language is somehow connected to that because that's part of your soul blueprint in a way. Now, these beings are also their own persons, right? You're not them, they're not you. But because of that energetic connection, you can say, "Oh, we're all part of the bigger soul. I would like to get the gifts from the Egyptian guy because he moves stuff with his mind."
Mm-hmm.
You know? So, but I'm just, just bringing an example. So I think absolutely like that. So light language is a language of the soul. It's a way for really, it just comes through and it can come through sound. It's bringing in other frequencies from other dimensions and really bringing that out. And sometimes you can draw it. People could do automatic writing, um, painting, sound speaking it, and sometimes they don't even have a language. Like I know like one of the galactic languages just sounded like, or like I would just do signs, but these signs are bringing frequencies, they're bringing things, and it just guided, if you allow, once you're open, it guides you to doing different things, and these are all different signs and things that are known probably more in other dimensions, and we're still translating it, we're researching it, as we open up.
I feel like it's a really interesting concept that you're describing because when as a human being, we think about communications in terms of vocalizing, like, I'll talk to you, Mike, and hey, I want a beer. And okay, go grab me a beer from the fridge. But then we talk about dolphins and it's, echolocating. And there's a numerous amount of variables when it comes to communicating. So based on what you're talking about, Dorie, and it's a fascinating concept to me, but for you personally, how do you feel like you are both receiving and interpreting light language? Like to your example that you gave for me, if I have the version of me in Egypt that's trying to connect with me, like is that just to chill up my spine? Do the hairs on my arms stand up? Like, how is that coming to you? And then how are you interpreting it? Because I think that like that piece is what defines you and what's defined Gregory when we've talked to him. Like people may have this ability, but they don't realize it. So how have you realized that?
I think doing again hypnotherapy and past life regressions are a nice way to get to that and open that up. It's like more ritualistic, but they're sort of like permission slips, as Bashar says, that they you kind of, because in our mind we've been taught that we need to go to a class or there has to be a milestone because technically we have all these gifts, right? But they understand that we understand things in a more linear, incremental way. So for you, maybe like doing a ritualistic thing like a past life regression or psychic reading or an Akashic records reading, when you do that, right, you're opening up this energy field. And now the beyond knows that you're ready. You're giving that permission because we have free will here. You're giving that permission that, hey, I want to know more. I want to connect with this. And when you see that, by just seeing it, you either heal some of the trauma or you also can receive those gifts. So I think a good start would be to do some like energetic work like this and readings to, kind of connect and understand those aspects. With hypnotherapy or hypnosis, like QHHT is wonderful. You personally, and sometimes it might take one or two or three times. If people are afraid or they're anxious, they might still be really blocked. Once they get more comfortable, they'll allow things to come in. But you will go ahead and see another life. I'm just guiding you. You see it. So it's just so nice. I mean, for you to believe it, to see it, and then you open up to that. And eventually you can do these affirmations and mantras and say, I want to be a so and so thing, like that aspects of my soul. I would like to download some of those gifts and use those gifts energetically here.
So,
This
so
is what I
yeah. So, Dory, just mentioned like free will, right? So we have to be open to it, and we have to basically give permission for whatever experience to happen. But how do you prevent like nefarious experiences from happening, right? So if we're opening ourselves up and we're asking, to connect with either a past ET life or another version of ourselves, how do we know that we're not going to get some type of evil something out of that?
Yeah, so you again, I think a part of it is discernment, right? Like just, talking to people, understanding like putting safety, but then if you rise above and see everything in a way like, okay, light and darkness, sometimes these experiences, nightmares are teaching people lessons because later on in their purpose, they're supposed to be not afraid of these things. And that's happened too. It's just like they want you to get used to this. They want you to yourself come to the conclusion of saying enough is enough. You're not going to hurt me. You're not touching me. You're not allowed. This happens a lot for people to, again, learn that assertiveness, learn the boundaries. If people don't have boundaries, and it's okay because we want to be loving and open, but you still have to understand that there's a method to this madness, and you have to learn and to practice to trust your own discernment. And you can always seek help. There's me, Gregory, and 1,000 other healers and people that people could, talk to. But again, just learn with hypnotherapy too, with QHHT. I always ask the person's higher self, how do they know you're talking to them? They say, oh, you get goosebumps, or you get a feeling, or you'll see like a bird. So it's nice to get those little things so sometimes, if someone is creepy and walks by you, you're like, oh, that person just gives me the
Mm-hmm.
heebie-jeebies. But that's what it is. That's discernment. That's the way that your body's telling you, alert, alert. But sometimes it could also just be fear because of a past life or something.
Mm.
So then again, you become empowered. You really become the project manager of your own multidimensional self.
So,
And that's the goal, right? For everyone to kind of learn.
so Dory, what was it like for you the first time you channeled this light language? Like, what was that experience?
Crazy. I lost my voice. I lost my voice for like 2 weeks. I think it was just a lot of energy and frequency coming through, high vibrational energy and frequency. So I was just,
So was it talking through you, or are you in like a meditative state, or like talk me through what that is?
yeah, no, I mean, well, so I did a meditation, yes. At
Mm-hmm.
first, the meditation that was just like, and the thing to your question too, when we meditate, right, I always ask only the highest vibrations are allowed here, calling all the angels, and just bringing in what makes me comfortable, right? And just putting in those things. So that's what I did. And in meditation, I was laying down and it was just like, okay, start speaking whatever language that comes in after again a couple of about an hour of like just listening to a guided meditation. And then I started speaking. I think the third time I did it, all of a sudden it was like, whoa. It was fire. I felt like a dragon, fire coming out of my mouth. It wasn't scary, but it was just like now that after I looked at it, and it was just moving my body, cracking me, doing hand things, and I think I was crying a little bit because I consider myself a star seed, and I was seeing some of my star family, and it was just like it felt like so it was my voice and it was another like I was also speaking, so it was there, so everything comes through, right? Like it's just me crying and then there's them answering and it was all coming through my mouth. It was very interesting, but I was just like, oh my God, this sucks, like why did you drop me off here? I know that's what get me, take me on the ship. So
That's fascinating.
It's interesting. So it almost sounds it's almost like a possession. Then is that like a
I can do one for you guys one day, or if you wanted to see an example, I
I
could
picked
just.
Brian.
Well, that was
whenever.
fast. Yeah, no, it's a fascinating concept to me,
I
Dory.
don't
And
know.
it's not some,
Okay.
is this, let me ask you this, is this something that you feel like can be learned, or is this something that's just simply a gift? Either you have it or you don't.
I personally think, again, everyone has these abilities. I think that maybe some are more open to it or they're older souls than others, meaning like they've had other lives, maybe like we discussed, like they've already been in different dimensions. But I personally think that everyone could learn it if they wanted to, the new human, if you wanted to tap in, you did practice and you had the intention. If anybody takes anything away tonight, I want to say intention is key in this density. If you have to want it and you have to verbalize it, I want these gifts. I want to show me what I need to do. Show me the blockages I need to get rid of to do this. So I personally think that you come in with it, but people can learn it. I honestly think really
So
people can.
Before you go there, so Dory, you mentioned like the old soul, right? And it that just kind of like spiked something in my mind because I've had numerous people over the years come up to me and be like, Mike, you've got an old soul. Now I took that as kind of like, like we would take it as like, oh, you just like some, old school type stuff, right? Like you like the blues, you like some older country, you got maybe your wisdom's maybe beyond like what your age really is type thing. Does that kind of tie into what you're talking about? Like maybe like the vibration that one's giving off as like an old soul, it's like somebody's picking that up and not really understanding why they're saying it.
Yeah, it could be. Yes, definitely. But sometimes, again, remember, and most people will say you had a past life in the 1920s, right? And you're still, some of that still gives you peace or you like it. And people will like old cars, like to me, everything, there's a particular connection, soul connection with whatever timeline that people like to do. A lot of times it just makes them happy or it really connects them to that feeling. Like, I like cardinals or just so that's one way of saying that you do have other existences because we do have newer souls that come to this planet. They're maybe like star seeds. Some of them have never ever been incarnated in a human body or in any other 3D. So there's newer souls. There's earth angels. Some of them never had human lives or other incarnations. So people are at different levels of their consciousness. So an old soul has had more, especially as star seeds, and I think that both of you are, have had other or do have many, many other existences, and they've had like many, many like they're more ancient. We get into this in a galactic episode if you people are interested of like other universes and what happened and some of the galactic history that people are channeling that we know so far, right? Like
I guess like
so.
Dory, when we're talking about this and we're talking about light language, I know earlier in the week when we kind of chatted, you and I were both familiar with Stephen Greer, and you just brought him up on this episode, and he has the CE5 group, which is essentially a group that will go out into the middle of somewhere, do a deep meditation, and then call on these beings. And it's really fascinating because there's a couple documentaries out there that'll show this group. They're out in the middle of nowhere. They do this deep meditation, and then orbs show up. And they have this really wild image of what appears to be a kind of a traditional ET, but almost like if you have a light and you whip it in front of your face and it kind of leaves a streak. It's like a streak beam. I'm not really sure. When you're talking about light language, is that similar to what we're seeing with Stephen Greer and the CE5? Are those one and the same?
Um, those are just beings that could manifest themselves, like materialize themselves in this dimension, right? Like a lot of times, sometimes if people see ET ships and stuff, they don't always they're not they don't so space and time isn't like linear for them, right? They can materialize in one place. I think they show this in Star Wars and Star Trek and stuff, and some of that is true, is based on what my I understand from my research, that they could materialize and dematerialize, and some of these beings could have interact in a more materialized way. Light language is more like if you were to connect with these beings, if that makes sense. Like it's basically you're, channeling or bringing this, but I don't have to speak, right? Like language, I can just do my hands or I can speak. or I can just write, or I can draw. You ever see, or people even play the music? It's just when you go to, well, you can speak. Most people think like it's spoken, but you can see light language drawings, and I can show you guys that of something that I did. So you can draw it, and it will have codes. Like sometimes people who are open and perceptive will look at it and they feel things from it. Or even people who are not perceptive. I'm like, what do you see? Do you feel something when you look at
Yeah,
it?
that's fascinating. It's really, and it's all about interpretation, which I think is, it's almost like you have to have an openness to the subject area to not only have an interest, but to be able to engage in it. And if you just immediately dispose of something, then you're never going to have an opportunity to do something with it. And Dorie, I would be remiss to ask, because of the background that you have going right now. You've got the hat, you've got the shirt. I see a couple UFOs on it. Like, what sparked your interest in extraterrestrials to begin with? Like, what's the origin story of your interest in this?
I think it was really inherent in my being, right? Like the more I researched and the more I realized, oh my gosh, like I see my mom's ET, lives, or I see my brother's ET lives, and I realized like that it was always inherent within me. It was just like everything is calculated, Brian. Like it really, it's almost like, when do you decide before you come here that you want to activate and open up to your true self, for those who have this kind of incarnations? So for me, I think it was time. And then I just got like addicted. I was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing. Because I always care about others in a way like beyond myself. And I thought everybody thought that, right? Like I concern myself with people and social justice and things like that. And I asked those certain people, they're like, well, I don't care. Like that's not okay. Well, so what if they're over there or over here? How's that going to change for me? It's not going to do anything for me. That was not the thing for me. So that's how I knew. I'm like, there's a reason I'm doing this. And then eventually I was like, oh my God, there's so much wisdom. I guess I'm a knowledge seeker. And
Yeah.
also so much wisdom to gain from all these other things.
Yeah.
So when you were going through, I mean, obviously you said knowledge, right? And you're seeking information. Like, how did like maybe like Bob Lazar? Because Brian and I've talked about Bob Lazar. Brian's a big Bob Lazar fan. That's actually what kind of kicked off this podcast. Was I saw a drawing of Bob Lazar in
My garage.
in his garage, and that's kind of actually exactly what kicked off this podcast. Like, so did he have any influence on your views of UFOs or like your extraterrestrial like life?
Yeah, I would say like after like actually getting into it and understanding it, I had a desire to connect with them, however way. And then I started watching all kinds of ET stuff, Bob Lazar, Joe Rogan, Dr. Greer, all his stuff. I was watching all his stuff. I did CE5. I personally think, again, if there are skeptics out there, I love them. And whatever they believe is true too. This is what's true for me and my experience. So I personally think that I have had feelings and interactions when I did C5. So yes, once that happened, I was watching everything, but I realized that I also relied on my own knowing. And some people think remote viewing is woo woo and this and that. So I had to feel, again, the discernment thing. Certain shows I watched, if they weren't making me feel right, I was like, this just feels a little bit.
Dorie, let me stop you for a minute, because what you're saying is really important and a subject that Mike and I have covered a lot of times, because we're both doing this show because we find it interesting, but it's really fascinating to me, people's ability to discredit a topic. And not only to discredit it, but to evaluate it with a non-open mind. Like if you go into something and I'm going to discredit it, and I didn't realize that you did CE5. And Mike, you and I have had this conversation because I watched the documentary, and I'm enough of a believer to say, like, I don't know if I want to do it just in case. And you talked about it earlier. If we would bring in something bad instead of good, like it kind of makes me uncomfortable because it's fear of the unknown more than it is anything else. So to your point, I think just having some open-mindedness about some of these subject areas is so important. And kind of the reason that we got to doing this podcast in general is there are too many things in this universe to be an expert at anything. You have to be a jack of all trades. And it's very closed-minded of you to go into anything without an open mind to say, let me make my own decision of if this is real or if this isn't, and don't just accept whatever, the social media opinion on the matter is and make your own decision. So like, good for you. And I'm actually curious, Dorie, can you tell me a little bit about your CE5 experience?
Yeah. So again, because people make fun of people, look at Bob Lazar, look at all these
terrible life.
Fuck, the federal government
has rated the hell out of it. And it forces people away from the topic. And you can't help but wonder if that's by design because this is real and we're trying to misinform you. And we know damn well that there's been disinformation campaigns run by the government. So is this one of them? And that's a little conspiracy theorist on our part, but I can't help but wonder because there's an awful lot of people that participate in this and a lot of people with credence like Christopher Bledsoe, who's working with Space Force.
Right. And Dorie, before you answer Brian's question, and that's another thing, because you brought up a good point, right? In when we first started this, I was kind of like the skeptic, right? But I don't like the word skeptic because like I've discussed in numerous other episodes, is skeptics aren't open-minded, right? They just immediately write it off. But I consider myself a free thinker. So like things that we may talk about that I'm just like, I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't think it's plausible. Isn't me being like writing it off. It's just, I don't think personally, like, it's just not legit. Right. But I'm giving it a chance to
open-minded.
Absolutely. And so that's why I don't like the word skeptic. And that's why I changed, I call myself a tweener, right? I can go either way with a compelling argument or whatever evidence I can be persuaded to believe something. Right. So I just wanted to touch on that because you brought it up in your little dissertation.
Well, Dorie, Mike and I talk a lot about 90% of what we hear is probably bullshit and 10% is probably real. And it's that 10% that drives us to ask questions and give me some tangible proof or give me some kind of like, I don't even know how to describe it. If in absence of physical proof, then give me a couple of coincidences where these things happen at the same time where it's almost, irrefutable, I guess. So that's a very long way of getting into telling us about your CE5 experience. Sorry.
I'm totally tracking. I'm tracking because this is what this is about, right? We need to air out all of our things, right? We need to release it. We need to have a platform to have these discussions in this type of society, right? Look at what's happening. I know people who've personally seen ET ships. But and they're just like, no, I need science to tell me this exists. Instead of, okay, but maybe like this is how they talk, remote viewing. People are waiting for some kind of science journal and scholarly shit, which I'm writing a dissertation right now. I can tell you a lot of that is good, but some of that is a scam. I'll just be honest with you. Very political and whatever. It's not always the best information that goes out. This is my personal opinion, and anyone can say whatever they want in the comments. Because I've been working on this dissertation for 2 years, and I got one more year of it, and it's wonderful. My work, I think, is good, but in a way, reading other things about even ETs and stuff. But people are like, there's no way. Like, how could you remote view, or how is this possible? I need the government or whatever. We've learned as humanity to constantly get information from a priest or a government or somebody always tell us what. Well, that time is up. Listen, you need to grow up. We need to go to freaking own it, learn, and really and I know sometimes we get hurt. Sometimes we're wrong and shit happens and there's negativity, but it's part of this dimension. Find your people, find a group that can support you. Find friends who are scientific, find friends who are spiritual, and learn, work it out. And I think skeptics is discernment. No one should just wrongfully just say, oh, you're telling me this is definitely the truth. None of us do this. That's crazy.
And if the government goes down, says we 100% absolutely this does not exist.
Well,
it fucking exists.
listen, we've talked on this show. Remote viewing via a governmental program 100% existed and is proven. So whether you want to believe in remote viewing or not, like that's something that our tax dollars have invested in.
Yeah.
In terms of religion, if you want to say, well, they've written it off. Well, that's funny because it's documented that the Pope during World War II called the United States and had them come up pick up a crash retrieval in Italy. Right. We talked about that on our podcast. So there are these little snippets of information throughout time that are fascinating, like Teddy Roosevelt potentially talking to an alien race during his root canal, which he never had a root canal. So there are all these little interesting tidbits. And, you know, all of us out there that are watching and listening and talking about the subject, or we have this wide universe and we're trying to connect all of these dots. And it's very hard because not a lot of them want to connect. And Dorie, what you're doing is so fascinating. And same thing with Gregory, like you're providing this vehicle, this medium to help connect these dots. And it's something that people aren't aware of because we're talking about a level of consciousness that people don't understand and we don't have a lot of conversation about. So I think just by virtue of us having this conversation, it's really, really enlightening.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, to Dorie's point, like a lot of people rely on religious leaders or the government to provide them for information, right? So if they don't provide that information, it doesn't exist. So therefore, everything that we're talking about right now is just a bunch of BS. But if they would just, to Dorie's point, take a step back, open your minds, and to your point, be curious, right? Ask questions, go down some rabbit holes while you're at night, you know, drinking some beers or whatever on some of this stuff, and then just you know, just be open-minded about it.
Dorie said this when we were talking to her earlier this week. Dorie, you said the terms trust, surrender, and allow. And that's something that I feel like, based on what Mike and I just talked about, really fits into this conversation. So I guess for you, kind of as I don't really know what I would call you, you know, a psycho-spiritual advisor, almost like a guidance counselor, like what would you...
Galactic counselor.
Yeah, galactic counselor. Like I love that. Like what would you advise people who are open-minded to this subject, but maybe haven't ventured down any kind of road into it? Like what would you advise them to do?
I want people to be empowered, that they have, like, you know, some of those ascended masters, in my belief, right? Even Jesus, they come and they tell you, you can do this. You can do this yourself. You can be like me, you know? So I'm not saying be egoistic or God. And I know that the mind is the trick here in this density. The mind is supposed to confuse you. And I'm a conspiracy theorist too. And I think certain forces here who are from, you know, from the beyond, interdimensional, and also existing here as humans are doing things to interfere with that. And it's part of the dance, okay? They're going to try to control minds with frequency, all those things that we, you know, again, I think is being done. But what are we going to do? Like sit here in victim mentality and be like, oh, you know, they're doing this and doing that. Okay, now what? What are you going to do about it? Sit and cry about it? Or are we going to be empowered? Are we going to do something? Are we going to learn who we are, connect to our spirit, and become empowered? So that way, you know that you can sit there and do CE5 on your own, and you can learn how to connect with beings. Believe in that. What you believe, you create. This is the type of reality we're in. And humanity doesn't need to be a slave or enslaved anymore. And you don't have to do this by yourself. There are so many people, so many people. We live in a free country. Just go on YouTube. And, you know, it's just wonderful. That's what I want. I want people to be awakened to who they truly are, the powerful being, the multidimensional, multifaceted being that every single person is. Even if they think they're a piece of shit, even if they're dealing with addiction, they're poor, it doesn't matter. You're rich. You're a spark of divine light from God. That's what it is, source, whatever you want to call it. That's my thing. That's what I want people to be empowered and see who they are. And I think with that, that's it, right? You start learning how to discern, how to think. Or you're just like, I don't give a shit. Does it exist? Are those reverse engineered or not? Is there negative ETs? Sure. I just say I love you and they leave me alone because they don't like love. We'll talk about that another time.
No, I absolutely just loved everything you said there, especially like, because in this modern day, we have a lot of people who just play the victim, right? And it's just like at some point, you just got to move past that.
Yeah, instead of playing the role of the victim, the question's not, oh, woe is me. It's what do you do with what you have left, right? And
Absolutely.
that's what defines you. And whether you find your power source from spirituality or a connection from whatever extraterrestrial race or your friends and family, it doesn't really matter. It's about forward progression. And I think that's kind of what you're talking to, Dorie.
Yes, absolutely. Because the soul has to progress, and not everyone wants to be good here. We have to understand that. I like to hover up, like that ET ship behind me, hover up and look from the 30,000, foot view that, hey, the dance is with light and darkness. Not everyone has to want to be light. Not everyone has to be want to be dark. This was a hard lesson for me because I'm always like, wake up, everyone. And it's just like, oh no, this is where they are. I need to respect that. I need to see what they're doing. And maybe somebody, this is part of their journey. I think the story of Chrysalis, when somebody tried to help the butterfly, they tried to, cut the cut it out of the cocoon, and there's like mechanism where the butterfly has to deal with struggles and difficulty for the fluid. Again, if there's a scientific botanist or whatever, I apologize, but to push that out for the butterfly to become a butterfly, and now you're interfering with people's process. So I think like taking responsibility for our own journey, understanding ourselves and respecting others with where they are may be helpful, because we can't always save everyone and help the world and help everybody in the world. What we can do is start changing ourselves, making ourselves better, and eventually everybody around us will also, and we'll attract people of the same mindset, or people who are more awakened and open, even if they don't believe in what we believe in. My husband doesn't, So
Yeah. So Dory, you mentioned like the way we process, right? So like, how do you help people process or even understand, extraterrestrial encounters or even like spiritual experiences? Like, where do you come into play on that?
I feel like, again, because I've like worked on myself and I've asked for a lot of my gifts to be activated. I can like really, when I sit and we have the intention, I can really sense a person's aura from what they tell me, what they're interested in, where they're at, because I'm assessing where their soul is. What are you attracted to? Because your soul is constantly talking to you. They're trying to give you messages, and a lot of times we just are blocking it, we're not hearing it. So I want to see, what are you interested in? People are like, I want to learn more. I'm like, what do you like psychic? Do you want to talk to your grandmother who's dead? Because that tells me, oh, they're interested in psychic mediumship, maybe they have that. Or bilocation or lucid dreaming, when people feel their body sometimes may be traveling, or all those things. For me, it's just like I'm constantly, I guess I am a counselor, galactic guidance counselor. But the cool thing is I can also see their galactic lives, right? And we'll go into that. So I can see multidimensionally, what are we dealing with, even with traumas. And we'll talk about family constellations and energies and things that we could, heal these traumas. But I think at least when I talk to someone, I can try to see where they're guided. And sometimes people have one or two sessions with me. Sometimes people want to have more sessions with me. I respect their process, right? It's not a forceful business idea. My purpose is for them to learn to be now in charge of their own healing. Because healing happens, or understanding happens within a person. No one can force it on you.
That's really interesting.
It's deep.
It's deep. And what makes this podcast and show, I guess now since we're on YouTube too, so fun is we never know what we're going to talk about. We do, but it's like talking to you, Dorie, is so fun for me because this isn't something that I ever anticipated having a conversation about. But because we're open-minded and I want to learn, and you said it earlier, like I want to learn everything I can learn that appeals to me as a person, whether that's my soul telling me that this is the route to go or just my general interest, whatever it is like, I think the message is follow your passion, right? And if you need a galactic counselor, you're probably the person to go out to.
Yeah, and there's many other ones, right? And this
Yeah.
is not me see who you resonate with. There's guys, girls, whatever, it's up to you. But yeah, it's something Bashar channels, Daryl Anka, and I love his stuff. He always says, follow your passion. I'm going to paraphrase it and take it all the way to the end for as long as you can't go without any insistence on the outcome. That's when you doing that. And I know it's difficult because we're in the physical reality and we feel like we can't always do that. But remember, we put these limitations on ourselves. Oh, this is how much money I have, so that's all I can buy. This is what I'm gonna do. This is what my family is dead, and this is my limit. No, I'm putting that limit on myself. We need to change that. We need to
I love it.
revamp.
So Dorie, just so for our viewers and listeners, like, so say they have this enlightenment, right? Or this thought that they want to reach out, or they want to figure out their spirituality, or maybe seek their guidance with some of their ET ancestry or whatever. How would they get a hold of you? Right? Like, can they send you a text message? Do you have Instagram, Facebook? Do you have website?
I do. I have a website. Again, I'm doing a dissertation. So I do this part-time, but I'm very passionate about it. So I still take clients. So my website has my email. I think my email, and then I just got a new separate phone for this phone number that should be on my website. And Telegram is a great place to contact me. I also have WhatsApp. So just contact me in the email or the text message, probably the email.
And what is your email?
It's celestialtherapyboutique@gmail.com, and you guys can probably tag it because I don't want to spell.
Yeah, no, I'll put that in. I'll put that in the
We already
description.
dropped it on Instagram earlier
Oh, yeah,
while
we
we were
did.
doing social media stuff, so it's already out there.
Well, we dropped the website, not the email.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
My
The website.
information is on the website. My information is on the website. I can just go do book online or underneath, and it has the numbers. I'm certainly happy to do a session, and there are prices over there. But if someone they really resonate with me and they feel like they can't afford it, please contact me, and we'll have a conversation, and I'll work with them.
Dorie, you're such a positive person. You're such a delight to talk to. And even from when we talked to you earlier in the week, it just makes you feel good to talk to you because you're just overly positive and just puts a smile on my face. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your week this week to have a conversation with Mike and I about, psychospirituality, hypnotherapy, and extraterrestrial kind of exploration, I guess, almost.
Yeah, and I am proud of myself because I didn't go down any rabbit holes.
You did good.
Although there was a lot of things Dorie talked about that I was just like, I want to know more. And I really this could have been like a 3-4 hour.
This is a teaser.
It's definitely a teaser. And the only reason it's a teaser is because Brian has kept me in check. He's got like a little, stun gun over there. It's like smacking me in the leg every time I got out of line. So I appreciate it, I guess. But we definitely want to have Dorie on in the future.
Dorie, I would be remiss to ask you because Mike and I typically cover current events, and I just posted on our social media earlier about it. Do you have any commentary on the New Jersey orbs that keep appearing? They've been in the news for the last several weeks, and you and I were kind of talking about different races of ETs that are out there, and some people want to be seen and some don't. And I'm just curious to get your take on that kind of news source because it's just more and more prominent as the weeks go on.
Sure. Yeah. Again, I tried not to watch the news as much and try to go with my instincts, but I felt like there was a combination of both because from some of the things that I look at, if we want to have ET contact, right? Humanity's timeline, according to Bashar, is maybe within these next 10 years, 5 to 10 years. So we can do that. And the more people believe it, and again, I told you guys, the Beyond wants to thank you, both of you. I know you thanked me, but let me thank you for doing this because as you do this, you create a platform for these types of conversations to be had. And that's a blessing. And however many people are listening to, you're still doing that. You're impacting them as they open up. We allow the more of us that entertain these ideas, it allows for more interaction and more of this coming to physical reality for us, right? I just said when we believe, we create. So thank you for that. Let me say that beforehand. But I think that it's a combination of both, because we will see more actual ET ships that we've been seeing, and the Galactic Federation or others, it's but on purpose that they want to be seen more. But there's also reverse engineered ones that are out there to infuse fear, or I think this is Dr. Greer's thing, and I don't know if I go sometimes as far as he does, but he says that it's just, again, to influence people and to make people, again, be afraid of ETs and make it seem like all ETs are going to attack us and they're going to murder us. And so there's all eat us or whatever and harvest our own season.
Well, Dorie, we thank you very much for those comments. That's very kind of you. I would agree there's a lot of disinformation out there. I posted on social media earlier, but I'll call it out again. James Fox, who has a lot of really cool ET documentaries out there, has one coming out tomorrow called The Program, which is exploring the U.S. government's knowledge of UFOs, which I can't wait to sit down and watch. And I think it just goes to, Dorie, what you're talking about, being open-minded and really having visibility to the information that's out there, and letting people make their own decisions. We're not here to sway you one way or the other. We're having these conversations because we think they're interesting, and we hope you do too. And hopefully that's why you like, follow, and subscribe and share.
Yeah, that's nice. And, like we talked about, and Dorie brought it up earlier, and actually you brought it up, as kind of like a spiritual journey, right? And whether we realize, I think whether you and I realize it or not, kind of our spiritual journey started with Gregory. And there was a lot of things that happened during that episode and after, which then led us to our current state. Now we're talking with Dorie, and we're talking about more spiritual. And, some of the things that she sent over the last week, I've actually done, which is surprising, but I have done them. I've done the 10-minute meditation every morning. And I'll tell you, man, I felt different. Like, I just feel good. Like, it just, I don't know. And I know, like, the VA is always like, oh, you need to meditate, whatever. And I always wrote it off as just being a bunch of bullshit because it came from the VA. But the videos that, Dorie shared with you and I and whatever I've done, and I mean, I don't know.
Dorie, the last thing I want to say is we're happy to have you come on today. I know we were kind of texting and chatting before the show, and, doing what's right and doing what's easy is a very fine line. And doing what's easy is not doing the show, and doing what's right is doing the show, because you have a gift and it's yours to share at your own discretion. So we appreciate you doing that, and we appreciate you doing that through the show. So thank you very much.
Much. Thank you, guys. I know this is very uncomfortable, and I know people make fun of it. And I'm sure people say otherworldly things may not be spiritual. Then what is that? That's definitely otherworldly. I mean, it's just perfect. Please continue doing this. Thank you for the opportunity and to be here, the platform to speak my knowledge and my truth and who I am. So I just really, really want to thank you for doing this and inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Dorie, I love you. I'm glad that you were on. Such a fascinating episode, and we are definitely going to have another one in the future, because we want to get into reptilians. I want to get into the density versus dimensions and the tethering and all that stuff. There's just so much that we can get into that you've opened my eyes to over the last, several weeks, months that we've been trying to, organizing, getting on, getting everybody together. And it's just learning things that I never thought that I would ever learn, or even start researching or discussing with you, Brian, or even with you, Dorie. So I appreciate you. I think that you've definitely opened my eyes to a lot of different possibilities. Now, whether or not I'm fully invested or whatever in, that's a different story, but I at least you provided me the opportunity to research them and take a deeper dive into them.
Yeah.
I'm proud of you for doing the meditation.
Well, I think, on that note, we'll wrap it up. For all of our viewers, please like, subscribe, share, Instagram, Facebook, Gmail's Otherworldly Encounters 2024 at gmail.com. Appreciate all of you guys watching, listening. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Please give us your comments, your feedback, ideas for more episodes, certainly ideas for new beers. Although I do feel like after today, I feel like a galactic hero.
Galactic here is awesome.
Yeah. So thank you all very much. Until next time, keep your mind open and your eyes on the sky. We'll see you.
Yep. And with that, we'll catch you on the next one.